Welcome to Second Watch with Rod Babers. This is On Texas Football. I'm Bobby Burton, joined by none other than Rod Babers. His name's in the title, guys. Rod, I tell you what, I know this is a day later than we normally do it, but we had to because we had some other things come up. But I wanted to give you your opportunity to talk to people after you rewatch the game and had a real chance to go over it with a fine-tooth comb and talk about it. This episode brought to you by our friends over at Hargrove. Know who's on your roof. We'll talk about them a little bit later in the show. All right, let's get to it, Rod. You lined out 5 things you want to talk about today.
Yep.
The very first thing you wanted to talk about, you said, was the second half adjustment on offense for the Longhorns. What was it that you saw, the adjustment you thought Texas made? Because they did do better in the second half.
They did, yes.
But what was it that they actually decided to do?
A couple of things that I've noticed, and one thing we've talked about before, but we've talked about targets to motion and how important they are in Sark's offense. They are kind of schemed open, first read, wide window throws, really helpful for a quarterback like Quinn to get him going. And I've talked about how that's one of the conceptual signatures of Sark. In the first half, 0 targets to motion. Actually, on our preview that we did of the Texas-Georgia game, I remember remarking that Georgia was very susceptible to targets to motion versus Mississippi State. They had a huge play on like a 70-yarder on Mississippi State did on Georgia in that game off of targets to motion. And that was something that stood out to me because it obviously aligns with one of Sark's philosophical ideologies. And in the second half, none in the first half, by the way, but in the second half, even on the first drive they scored on, you had 2 targets to motion. Matter of fact, the touchdown was a target to motion. Remember, that was the corn dog play that Andy Reid had made so famous in the Super Bowl, but just said some people call it an arrow return motion. Some people call it a jet return motion. Either way, they're just trying to figure out if the defensive back has man coverage on that motion man, which was Isaiah Bond at the time. And then Bond runs the quick out route, and Golden's out there to essentially make it a rub route, a rub concept. DB has to decide whether to go underneath or go over the top. Either way, you're going to be wrong because the ball's out so damn quick and you're right there on the goal line. Ended up being a touchdown. Early on that drive, Matthew Golden had I believe it was a 24-yard reception, one of your biggest plays of the game. And he came because he was on a target motion. I believe that might have been on one of those plays where he ends up getting hit with that. Might have been the targeting, if I'm not mistaken. Could have been that one. But either way, my point was it was a target to motion. And that was one of the things that I think Texas could have exploited versus Georgia, maybe a little bit earlier in the game. Now, when your quarterback is off and your offensive line's not blocking, I don't know if anything really is going to work. I'll throw that out there. But I think early on, it might have been something worth trying in the first half because it worked so well in the second half. You ended up being, if you look at it, they were 4-4 on targets to motion in the second half of the game, including the first 2 on that first scoring drive. So maybe that was something Sark could have done a little bit more of. Usually in big games, Sark has a ton of targets to motion. It's something that's part of his, kind of innovative, creative process, in my opinion. But he did admit that he threw out a lot of the game plan. Once they got down in the game and once they were down 23-0 and he found that his offensive line couldn't block and Quinn wasn't having his best game, I think he threw a lot of the game plan out. He even mentioned that with Jaden Blue having no rushes, but having, I believe it was a 7 targets, something like that. He said, hey, that's just kind of where the game went. So I totally get that. And maybe that's why the targets to motion didn't come until they reset the offense pretty much in the second half. But it was a concept that worked really well for him. Another thing, and we talked about this before too, and it was something that I thought was very prevalent when Arch Manning was the starting quarterback. They were going a lot more 12 personnel in situations that normally Sark would deploy 11 personnel. And now Sark is usually a 50% 11 personnel guy, no matter what the situation, year, doesn't matter here at Texas. 50% of the time, he's 11 personnel. That's his baby. Usually when you're in third and long, third and medium, he's in 11 personnel. That's his baby. That's where most of his speed is. And I think that's where he believes he's got the most explosivity as an offense. But lately, and I talked about this, and I thought it may have been an Arch modification. And they were going with a lot more 12 personnel and not in the same situations that we had seen in previous years. Then now you were seeing 12 personnel in some third down situations. And in this game, you were trying to make a comeback, and Sark was out there with 12 personnel, which is a little surprising considering nothing against Warren Davis. Warren Davis has been great this year, but he's not necessarily a down the field threat. And I don't know if he's actually even caught anything beyond maybe 5 to 8 yards. Have we seen him go down the field? So he's mostly a check down. It's a check down option. And Gunnar Helm, of course, has been great. He's a vertical threat in your 2 receivers. And maybe they like Jaden Blue in that 12 personnel set because he's basically another receiver. So maybe that's another reason why. So I'm thinking that for Sark, it's either insulation and pass protection because of the way Warren Davis can block and Gunnar Helm. And we know that was an issue versus Georgia. Like I said, he's been kind of trending this way anyway a little bit. But that was the case versus Georgia. And obviously he must like it as a another boost or some juice in the running game as well. So I just maybe 12 personnel. Strange to say this because Texas offensive line was considered to be one of the best in the country. I think he likes it as another, like I said, added blocker in the passing game. And I think he seems to like it as another added blocker or another capable blocker in the running game. But with the deepest wide receiving core Texas has had since Sark has been here, it's interesting that you're seeing them go more toward 12 personnel. And I think it's more the running game. I think he now might be the passing game and pass protection too. But I think he wants to boost the running game a little bit. And maybe he believes 12 personnel is the best way to do it. And they have had, in this game, at least they had a lot more of their bigger plays. They didn't have a lot of big plays, but more of them were in 12 personnel than 11 personnel. That also is pretty rare for a Sark offense.
The announcers during the game, Rod, commented about how Sark was using 2 tight ends, and they thought it was strictly because they needed more pass protection.
Yeah, I can see that too.
Now, the facts are he also ran more out of it. The first 4 plays of the second half were all runs.
Yep. In 12.
So, I mean, look, he went that way, and for whatever reason, it started working. I mean, frankly, Texas got 23-15, and then I think Georgia may have made some adjustments and made it harder on Texas from there. All right, the next thing you said, Georgia beat Texas with scheme and personnel on defense. Georgia beat Texas with scheme and personnel on defense. I think personnel, we could all see it with our own eyes. What do you mean about scheme?
Yeah, I mean, there was so many different types of ways they applied pressure. I mean, I want to, I was thinking I was going to go back and be able to track, it was this specific strategy that was really able to have success versus Texas and exploit and expose Texas. It wasn't just one specific strategy. I mean, they got pressure with three men or 3-man front. They got pressure with 4-man front. They got pressure when they blitzed 5. They got pressure when they went with a 0 blitz with 6 men. I mean, they got pressure every way you can get it. And I think that's what really surprised me. I thought it, and I'll say this: they stemmed. I saw a lot of stemming on the defensive line and a little.
Explain what that means to people that are unaware of what that term means.
Okay, yeah, the defensive linemen, usually they're set in their 3-point stance or their 2-point stance, and right before the snap, you would see them shift to a different gap. All right, and simultaneously shift to a different gap. And a lot of times you'd watch the second level linebackers, they would either come up and give the illusion of mugging the B gap, or they would end up coming and blitzing, all designed to just confuse the blocking scheme. So that the offensive line has no idea who's coming, who's dropping, who's going to spy the quarterback. You really never know, depending on how they want to play it. And they did it was a master class. It was a master class. I mean, you go think about some of the disguises that they were able to pull off of. Think about the 4th and 6, right? The last 4th and 6 for Texas. When Quinn throws it to Ryan Wing, goes just short. I remember 4th and 6. It was a little bit longer. I think it's like 4th and 12 or something like that. It's a little bit longer, but he was short, obviously. And they didn't get the first down. Ends up being a turnover on downs. On that play, they shift from an odd front to a 6-man front, and then ends up being a 0 blitz. And that all happens within 2 seconds of this 2 to 3 seconds of the snap. All of that for the offensive line to process and the quarterback to process. That is a lot. And so just rewatching it, when I went back and rewatched it, I kind of came away with the conclusion, yes, of course, Quinn played a bad game. He did not play a good game at all. But it wasn't necessarily totally all on Quinn in terms of the pass protection. There were breakdowns there in terms of, and I'm saying some of the routes. Take the interception, right, by number 6, right, where he baits Quinn Ewers, and he's essentially going to show Quinn that it's going to be a zone coverage. He's going to carry Gunnar Helm. He's showing him because he bails out to show him, hey, I'm going to carry Gunnar Helm, but he doesn't. He's reading Quinn, and when Quinn reads that he's bailing out, Quinn's going to throw that quick out to Matthew Golden there. Then the cornerback decides, or the cornerback obviously gets out of his disguise, and there ends up playing a cover 2 instead of a zone coverage or a 2-man. They just play a simple cover 2. He jumps that route, ends up intercepting it. What you want Gunnar Helm to do in a situation is to attack that outside shoulder of that DB. So he's got to come through you to come back down to cheat on that route and to jump that route. But he doesn't, right? He just kind of goes casually up the field and allows that DB to almost unencumbered to read and also come down and break on the route. Now, I'm not being critical of Gunnar Helm at all, but if you want to critique, if he attacks that outside shoulder, that corner just can't come. Matter of fact, he might force that corner to have to turn and respect that outside release, or that corner's got to come through him now to go cheat and jump that route. But he had a clean angle to the football. If you'd have given him over a dirty angle, he had to adjust and come around. That might be a catch for Matthew Golden, and they were moving on. So it's yes, Quinn, he's got to make better decisions. He's got to play better. But when you start looking at it in the details, you realize, but there are other breakdowns, at different levels of the offense that are also not helping his situation. And I think maybe Sark looked at some of that stuff too. So yeah, it's a team game. All right. A couple of guys, not necessarily executing the way that they were prepared and the way that they have been practicing and the way the coach tell them to execute. It can lead, those little details, man, they really can lead to big plays. And that was one of them there. So I'm not saying that was all going to help, but usually you attack that outside shoulder when either you're running that guy off or you attack that outside leverage, force that DB to have to respect it. If he respects Gunner's outside leverage or respects Gunner as a vertical threat, he never gets to jump that route, or he's late to jump it.
Yeah,
small things.
It is small stuff, and I will say this: I'm a little concerned about the execution level on offense in a number of different ways, including the small stuff. Right now, that's based on what we saw. A lot of small things hurt Texas, including jumping offside or procedure penalties again, missing assignments in the blocking. I mean, just a couple different things that all add up to negative plays, and you can't have that when you're trying to maintain the number one team in the country and playing a team that's won 2 of the last 3 national championships. All right, let's say thank you to our friends over at Hargrove Roofing, Rod, with offices all over Louisiana and Arkansas, and of course, Texas, including Austin. Hargrove Roofing will take care of all of your roofing needs. Plus, they're Longhorn friendly with partners like our kicker, Bert Auburn, and former defensive tackle, Stevie Lee. They are the most pro burnt orange roofing company out there. Call them today for a free roof inspection. Hargrove Roofing, know who's on your roof. 512-645-3202. Thanks for your sponsorship of On Texas Football. All right, hey, Rod, what is the disguise that led to the big plays? Is that like you talked about with that interception? What about the strip sack is another big play for them?
Yep.
What were some other big plays where you thought the disguise led to big plays for them? Is that did they just do you're talking about the mugging of the linebackers and stemming of the front?
Yep.
That's what you're at?
Yep, that's exactly right. And then obviously I'll give that corner a lot of credit. And I think it was the same corner actually ended up getting the interception, number 6, who had a hell of a game. I think the only bad play I've seen him make was when Gunnar Helm caught that kind of Randy Moss style catch over the top of him. But yeah, he did a great job disguising that blitz. I just think you're going to see more defenses now facing Texas try to apply this strategy. Do they have the dogs that
literally?
No, they ain't got a Mikael. They ain't got a Mikael Williams. They can't do that kind of stuff. They ain't got those types of players. But I do think you're going to see teams try to stem more on the defensive line. I think you're going to see more shifts on the defensive front against the Texas offensive line. I think, ultimately, they're just going to try to confuse the Texas O-line, confuse the blocking schemes. And I think that's one of the things that you would take from it. You can't play the game Georgia did. But if you want to if Vandy's going to try to take something that they can replicate, it would be, hey, let's be more active in our front 7 against Texas. Now, Texas will probably just try to run the football against Vandy, and so this will be a moot point. They couldn't do that against Georgia. Had to throw the football because they weren't necessarily moving the football, running it. I think Texas had, 29 rushing yards, something like that. So they weren't moving the football, so they had to throw it. And if you can get Texas into a predictable passing situation, which is what they were in the entire game, basically, against Georgia, and then that's when Georgia was able to tee off and come up with all these really exotic very elaborate pressure packages and looks. Most teams won't be able to apply that because it won't be applicable. They won't put Texas in that position. But I do think Texas will see a lot more stems. They'll see a lot more movement and shifts up front, even on early downs, just to try to see if they can get their defensive line and try to see if they can get their front seven some type of advantage, penetrating or being able to shoot different gaps or just confuse the blocking scheme. So there's a blueprint now that some teams will try to adapt to try to beat, at least to try to discombobulate Texas pass protection schemes. Even Sark said that the strip sack from the cornerback blitz, that wasn't Quinn's fault. He did say that. He said it wasn't on Quinn. So that's another, but you talk about the small details, another detail that was missed. Not sure who missed it. He didn't talk about all that, but that wasn't on Quinn either. So when I started looking at the film, you start kind of realizing like, Quinn had a bad game, but there are other variables, other factors at play here that are not helping his situation. And that's the guys around him. So between the offensive line and between Quinn having a bad game, ultimately, give Georgia credit. That's the reason for it. I mean, Texas could have gotten blown out much worse in this game on the rewatch. I mean, that's what I realized too. Georgia dropped between interceptions and passes. They probably dropped 10. They dropped like 4 interceptions and they dropped like 4 or 5 passes too, receptions. That was something else that kind of stood out in this game that, not for the defense playing well, this thing could have gotten really out of hand. Defense really came to save the day for Texas in a lot of ways, but you don't want necessarily that to be your identity now as a team. But right now with the offense, flailing a little bit, I think Texas is going to be trying to start winning games with their defense, and you may see Sark call plays in a complementary fashion like that until the offense gets back on track.
Is the defense the silver lining on rewatch for you?
Oh, no doubt.
Of this game, is that the one that you kind of circle and say, hey, these guys played really well?
Yep. Better than I thought, actually. I mean, when we talked about how Georgia only had one scoring drive over 35 yards, and going back on the rewatch, man, Texas defense played better than I initially thought. I mean, Georgia, Trevor Etienne is a problem. I mean, that dude, he's a dude, right? They had a problem with him initially, but like I said, I don't think he made enough big plays to, in my opinion, to impose their will in the run game on Texas. I still think Texas won their fair share in the running game, and they forced so many takeaways and had made so many big plays, got their hands on so many footballs in the passing game against Carson Beck that I really thought maybe you could say they could have got more sacks and tackles for loss. But in my opinion, I think they played some championship level defense, considering the situation they were put in by the offense over and over again. So me, no doubt, silver lining is the defense is as good as advertised. They're still the number 1 defense in the country. They are as good as advertised. Very little that I could critique about the way the defense played. Ultimately, this was a failure in the 2 other phases of the game. So I don't think special teams gave you much of an advantage either. Going back on the rewatch, your punting didn't help you. You had the kickoff return that was called back because of holding. Special teams left a lot to be desired. So I think they got some work to do in 2 phases, 2 out of 3 phases. Texas needs to get back to work.
Yeah, they're far from perfect on special teams. You mentioned that, and Sark even brought it up. 3 of their first 4 possessions, Texas started inside their own 13-yard line. And so that's not good. While Georgia average starting possession, I think in the first half was their own 47. That's a 34-yard difference. And that changes your play call too.
Yeah,
you're not going to throw a lot of outs down there.
Right.
It's not going to do much of that because somebody sits on it and it's an easy 7 points. Rod, last thing I had for you is looking forward to Vandy. Is there anything on offense that you saw other than the 12 personnel that maybe gives you some hope for what we go forward with? Is part of that, I guess, that Vandy isn't Georgia athletically at some level? I mean, how overwhelming was the Georgia pass rush compared to, say, a normal pass rush that we'll see in the SEC?
I think it's very different. I think it's a huge drop off between Georgia, the standard of college football right now, and hell, even us, even Texas, with the team ascending in that direction. So I think that's the good news, right? Is that, hey man, nobody else is going to be able to present the problems that Georgia presented to you. Not right now. And with what's left on the schedule, A&M and Arkansas, they got some really good defenses, some good players. And I actually think on the defensive line, they got some guys who will play on Sundays. But I don't know if they present the same problems Georgia does. But they will try to replicate some of the issues that Georgia was able to present to you. So that is something that down the line, I think Texas could be worried about if they don't improve in that area. But I don't know if Vandy can do it. I don't know if Vandy, they just don't have the high level talent to be able to execute some of that. So you don't have to worry about that versus Vanderbilt. I think versus Vandy, you just want to see improvement in those areas because Vandy will try to test you. I guarantee you'll see movement up front. You'll see them stemming and shifting. If anything that I got that was a reason to be optimistic coming out of that game is number one, the defense is legit. The defense is going to keep you in every game this year. So that's, at least you know that. No matter how bad the offense plays, defense will keep you in every game. And I think ultimately, offensively for Texas, you're not going to see a defense with the high caliber athletes on the defensive line and front seven that Georgia has. You're just not going to see it. Maybe in the college football playoff, maybe in the SEC title game if you're lucky enough to make it there. So maybe that's the silver lining, but there's not many silver linings on offense, man. You played the worst. That's probably the worst offensive line performance I've watched Texas play pass protection-wise, and I don't think I've seen Quinn play a worse game than that either. I can't recall it. Pro Football Focus has it as his career low Pro Football Focus grade and his career low passing grade in that game. So according to their metrics, it was Quinn's worst game. And I would say the offensive line allowed 28 individual pressures in that game. And they haven't done that, I believe when CJ said, since Sark and Kyle Flood have been on campus. So you can make the argument it was the offensive line's worst game. So it's not a lot, to me, I don't think there's a lot of silver linings to look at on the offensive side of the ball. If that's all right, they'll go back to work.
All right. That's going to do it for Second Watch with Rod Babers. Thanks again to our partners, Hargrove Roofing. Know who's on your roof. Austin office 512-645-3202. Or if you're around the state or in Louisiana, Arkansas, you can visit them at www.hargroveroofing.com. Thank you for your sponsorship. All right, Rod. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon, bud. You have a good one. Hook 'em.
Hook 'em.